Okay, so as I was saying, 1856, we are witnessing a political realignment. Exit the Whigs. Whigs don't, they're not even around anymore. The Republican Party picks up some of their support insofar as in the Northeast, there's people who traditionally supported First Federalists and then Whigs are now backing the Republican Party. Republican Party has a little bit of anti-immigrant stuff, but not enough for some people. So that's why we have the American Know Nothing Party or slash Whig. But it's really the Know Nothing Party, their anti-immigrant nativist party. Obviously, the Democrats win big here in 1856. And the main conflict that is going to happen, we're really going to start ramping it up towards civil war here. Not because of the election, but because of some stuff that happens subsequently. Bleeding Kansas, my man, John Brown, American hero as far as I'm concerned, is responsible for what we remember as Bleeding Kansas. It's said, this is 1856, so it's said that he read the newspaper with the article talking about Charles Sumner being beaten down in on the Senate floor, and then that's when he decided to actually hatch his plan in Kansas to, you know, uh, take care of some of these people that advocated for slavery in the way that he thought was best. He is not the only one. So, Kansas territory at this time period, because of popular sovereignty, there is a virtual war going on. Because, again, yeah, you could decide it at the polls between, whoever gets the most votes for or against slavery, but you could also kill all the other people that advocate for the other position. So maybe do that. And that's exactly what's happening. You have effectively lawlessness. You have free soilers who are the abolitionists, and then what were derisively called, obviously, the border ruffians, the kind of southern hillbillies who wanted slavery, extension of slavery into the territories. John Brown is having none of that. So obviously, all of this comes from the idea of popular sovereignty, right? When the government punts on making decisions, the people are going to take it into their own hands, and sometimes democracy works, and sometimes democracy leads to mass violence, and that's what we have here. May 23rd, 1856, again, this is the day after Brown reads about the caning of Sumner. John Brown and his sons go and hack 5 pro-slavery settlers to death in Pottawatomie, Kansas. And then they go on to kill about 20 more in Osawatomie. I think one of the Brown sons is killed. So pretty good, pretty good record here. It's like they're playing on the difficulty level is set to beginner for the Brown clan. And they're doing pretty well. If you want to actually see a very good um, series on John Brown, Showtime right now has it's called The Good Lord Bird. Ethan Hawke is John Brown. It also features what's this, Daveed Diggs of Lafayette slash Jefferson fame in the original cast of Hamilton is Frederick Douglass. I don't know, maybe you can't even watch it. I don't know if it's rated R or something, but it's very good. So if you want to know more about John Brown, that's quite, quite, quite good. John Brown is a deeply religious man. He knows the Bible backwards and forwards, and he doesn't think you can justify slavery. And he really feels as though he's a prophet sent from God to accelerate. He's kind of an accelerationist in a sense. Accelerate the push towards a war in which the United States will reckon for its sins, its original sin of slavery. Here is another image of John Brown taken by a black photographer. John Brown is like a real deal abolitionist. He's not like a colonization society person. He really does believe in racial equality and puts his life on the line, right? So it's a white man putting his life on the line and fighting for the freedom of enslaved black laborers. Later on, after his uh, successes, as you could say, in Kansas. He goes back and kind of goes on a fundraising tour for his next big. It's like I always picture John Brown as like being on the Shark Tank or something, where he's like, they ask him like, well, what was your last, what were your, how many people did you kill in your last venture? He's, well, 25 people in Kansas, and the Sharks are like, oh, and then he's going to make his pitch for more money. And that's exactly what he's doing. He goes back east. He's a fugitive from the law, but he's famous at this point. And again, this is 1856 is not 2020, right? So like, it's not as though like, people's cell phones are going off with like, like look out, be on the lookout for John Brown. He can blend in pretty well. He can travel in abolitionist circles and skirt the law pretty well. So he does get some money from some abolitionists. I actually think Frederick Douglass does give him money, but is skeptical of his plan. He meets, I think, with Emerson. And Emerson is a transcendentalist, man. He freaks them out. I don't know if he gets any money from Emerson or Thoreau. So the plan is to attack the Harper's Ferry federal arms, weapons, and ammunition depot, and then take the weapons, go out into the countryside, arm enslaved laborers, and start a insurrection, effectively a race war against the Southern planters. It doesn't work. He is caught and tried. It's actually Robert E. Lee is one of the Marines that goes in and captures him, tries him for treason. He goes on to make a final speech, which I'll include here in the slides if you want to read it. It's very, very good, and it kind of goes viral. The Southerners make the mistake of letting him speak before he's executed, and it's very, very like, it's got shade. It's got the Bible. It's got everything you could ever want from like a really good condemnation of slavery. So there it is. It's on the slides. You can read it if you want. John Brown's sons, actually, two of his sons go on to move. They move to California, and they live on top of I don't know what the mountain is. It's not Mount Wilson. It's one of the mountains just north of Pasadena. They actually build a cabin there, and two of his sons move out west and live right here in Southern California. Okay, so that's 18. So the Harper's Ferry raid is 1859. Bleeding Kansas is 1856. In the meantime, 1857, you have one of the most infamous Supreme Court decisions of the time period, and probably the most indicative of the sentiments of the Taney Court of this time period. And it's an abolitionist test case. The abolitionists support this. They support Dred Scott, who is the formerly enslaved man, and they push his case to the Supreme Court. So the idea is this. Scott is enslaved in Missouri. He moves with his enslaver. They move to Illinois. He lives there for 4 years. In that 4-year time period, he becomes a citizen of Illinois, right? So he's a citizen in Illinois. He is then moved back to Missouri, and he sues for his freedom. He says, hey, wait a minute, I was a citizen, I was a free person for 4 years, I'm free now. Taney Court does not agree. Taney says that this is like, I always picture there was a meme a few years ago about like, sir, this is an Arby's. And I always picture that Justice Taney's decision as a like, sir, this is a Arby's. Because he goes way beyond the strictly what he could have a very narrow ruling about this one particular person or this one particular circumstance. He goes way beyond what he needs to. He says that because you're black, Dred Scott, you're not a citizen, and you can't even sue, right? So you've got no standing at all to even press suit, right? But that's not all. Effectively, what the Dred Scott decision is doing is it is explicitly restricting citizenship to whites, right? So by saying that because you're black and you can't press suit in court, it is really indicating that black Americans who have always had, free blacks at least, have always had a kind of gray area status, not citizens, can't press suit. So forget about enslaved people, but even free black Americans can't press suit. You're not entitled to any rights or privileges of citizenship. Again, if you're even free black. And that's not all. He goes even to the extent of saying that the Missouri Compromise is completely unconstitutional because it effectively bars, it's in violation of the Fifth Amendment, which allows you to take your property wherever you please. So this is a huge decision, and it is a loss. If you're an abolitionist, it's a big step backwards. It's actually seen as one of the kind of probably more infamous Supreme Court decisions of certainly of the 1800s, if not top five most infamous decisions ever. That is the Dred Scott decision. Abolitionists don't like it, and it is yet another data point that kind of pushes us closer to right inexorable conflict. Meanwhile, 1858, we have here honest Abe with the cheekbones and Stephen Douglas with the lack of cheekbones, who are going to run against each other for a Senate seat in Illinois. Abraham Lincoln is a Republican. He is challenging the incumbent Stephen Douglas. Remember Stephen Douglas from the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the guy who wanted the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad in Chicago? That's him. So why we remember the Stephen Douglas or the Lincoln Douglas debate is because it is effectively a debate about can we have Dred Scott, where effectively it says slavery everywhere? Can we have popular sovereignty, where local municipalities will decide? This is where Lincoln gives his famous House Divided speech that, House divided cannot stand. It's either all free, i.e., it is like the Dred Scott decision is unconstitutional and we get rid of slavery, right? And then we have all free or all slave, right? That you can't have it both ways. You're either all free or all slave. Douglas wins the debate and he wins the Senate seat with this kind of obscure idea of the Freeport Doctrine. This notion that you can have it both ways. It doesn't make any logical sense, but sometimes politicians don't make logical sense and they still get elected. And that's what happens with Stephen Douglas. 1858, Lincoln gonna come back in 2 years and become the president. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Stephen Douglas. So we will see Lincoln again 2 years later. 1860, Lincoln wins. Again, John C. Fremont, the first go at it 4 years earlier. Now we have a Lincoln win. You'll see Northern Democrat and then Southern Democrat. This is the kind of voting, we don't need to get into the intricacies of it, but effectively you could split a ticket and, cobble together a win by having these other, Southern, Northern. We don't need to worry about it. All you need to know is that Lincoln wins. And Southerners are, so up in their feelings about it because they think Lincoln is a radical and he's going to abolish slavery. This is one of the ironies of history. Lincoln is not a radical. He doesn't want to, take away your slaves right away, at least. He just is saying it's either going to be one or the other. We got to figure out what we're going to do. In the course of the South rebelling and reacting to Lincoln, he becomes more radical because he has to out of necessity, but he's not a radical to start with. This is maybe a little PG-13. We have a lot of Lincoln imagery maybe in our mind. You sure as heck don't have this one. Again, when I record this lecture, I'm hesitant to get into the more lurid descriptions of this thing, but this is a marble statue of Abraham Lincoln that's actually at the federal courthouse in Los Angeles, in one of the interior kind of lobbies, and this is a hunky, shirtless, and barely clothed Abraham Lincoln, who we don't necessarily, when we think of Lincoln, we think of this old geezer, right, with the cheekbones. You don't think of this, young fellow here. So anyway, if you ever go to the federal courthouse for whatever reason, hopefully you're on the the right side of the law, but you'll get to see that. Okay, lastly here, 1860, they know they can't run an extreme candidate, so they don't. Lincoln's not an extreme candidate. They're afraid that Northerners are going to vote for Stephen Douglas. If they do run a kind of radical. And remember, the Republican Party, as I said, and as I'll talk more about in future lectures, they're really radical. A lot of Republicans are super, super radical. Lincoln is not one of them. He's not Thaddeus Stevens. He's not one of these radical abolitionists who are really pushing for a lot of change. Lincoln is a moderate, not an abolitionist. He does believe that the Constitution protects slavery in the states where it already exists, right? That's not enough for the Southerners. What Lincoln's main thing is that he wants to preserve the Union, right? With or without slavery, he wants to preserve the Union. He wants to ideally isolate it to where it already is and not have it extend out to the rest of the country. But he believes, right, that slavery should not exist in the territories. Right, so this is the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bleeding Kansas. All of the fighting that's happening is about popular sovereignty and the extension of slavery to the territories. Lincoln says, I don't agree with it. And you have here the kind of county by county map of who votes for whom. Lincoln, obviously, a lot of support in this northern area, which is, again, the old Northwest. This is the land of formerly Federalists and Whigs. This is the land of free soil, free labor, free men here, and that is the Republican Party. More on how the South feels about it in the next lecture.